The courtroom was quiet except for the soft hum of the air conditioning and the occasional rustle of papers. People were seated, waiting. Reporters whispered into their phones. Lawyers adjusted their ties and shuffled notes. Everyone was waiting. For the next witness, he walked in slowly with steady steps. Not because he was nervous, but because he knew what this moment meant. He had seen tough times before, far worse than a courtroom. He wore a clean shirt, neat haircut, and carried himself like someone who had once worn a uniform with pride. Around his neck hung a small medal on a ribbon, not flashy, just something simple that held deep meaning. It wasn't decoration for show. It was proof of sacrifice, proof that he had risked everything for people he didn't even know. He stepped up to the stand, took his seat, and looked ahead. The judge, sitting high above, finally noticed the medal and paused. There was a long silence. Then, the judge spoke clearly. "Sir, you'll need to remove that medal before you begin your testimony." The room didn't gasp, but something changed. A shift. Like when wind passes through open space, quiet, but noticeable. The man blinked. He looked at the judge, confused. "Excuse me." "You heard me," the judge said again. "You can testify without it." Some people in the courtroom leaned forward. Others exchanged glances. The lawyers didn't say anything. One of them gave a small shake of the head, but stayed quiet. The man looked down at the medal. His fingers touched it lightly. He thought about where it came from, about the day it was given to him, about the friend who never made it home. He didn't argue. He didn't want to make a scene. So he unclipped the medal gently and placed it in his pocket. "I understand," he said quietly. But inside, something hurt. That moment didn't last long, but it was caught on camera. Someone snapped a photo. Another person recorded a short video. By the time the hearing ended, the clip was already being shared online. At first, it was just a few people talking, then more, then many. Why did he have to take it off? That medal is part of who he is. He fought for us. Why isn't that respected here? The conversation grew. Some said the judge was just doing his job, keeping things neutral. Others said it was wrong to ask someone to hide their honor in a place where truth should matter most. Back at home, the man sat alone, staring at the wall. His wife asked how it went. He shrugged and said, "Fine." But she could tell it wasn't fine. Later that night, he checked his phone. Friends were sending messages, strangers too. They thanked him, apologized for what happened, said they were proud of him. He read every message. Some made him smile, some made him angry, some made him feel like maybe what happened wasn't just about him anymore. The next morning, the story was everywhere. News sites picked it up. Talk shows debated it. Veterans wrote posts about it. People started asking questions about respect, fairness, and whether everyone truly stood equal in court. He didn't want to be famous, didn't want to be known for something so small, yet so big. But now there was no turning back, and as he got ready for another day, he realized that the hardest part might not be going to war. It might be coming home and still having to fight. The days that followed were not like he expected. He thought once the hearing was over, things would go back to normal. He'd go home, maybe forget about what happened, or at least try to. But that wasn't how it worked. By morning, the video had spread far beyond the small group of people who were in the courtroom. It showed him sitting there, calm, quiet, then the judge's voice saying, "You'll need to remove that medal before you begin your testimony." It played again and again online. People added comments below the clip. Some said the judge went too far. Others said rules are rules, and courtrooms are serious places. But most people just wanted to know one thing. Why? Reporters started calling. At first, he didn't answer. He wasn't used to being on camera unless it was for something official. He wasn't a politician or a celebrity. He was someone who did his job, came home, and tried to live a quiet life. His wife answered the phone once, then hung up fast. She told him, "They won't stop calling. You should say something." He didn't want to. He didn't see the point. But then he saw what others were saying. A woman wrote online, "That medal is not a distraction. That medal is a part of who he is." Another person posted, "If I wore my father's ring in court, they wouldn't make me take it off. Why is this different?" And another message caught his eye. "You fought for us. Now we're fighting for you." That one stayed with him. Later that week, someone from a veterans group reached out. They said they were watching what happened and wanted to help. They asked if he was okay. He said yes, even though he wasn't sure if that was true. Then came the interviews. Not big ones, just local radio and a few smaller news websites. He talked slowly, choosing each word carefully. "I served," he said. "I did what I believed was right. And when I walked into that room, I didn't think I'd have to hide that part of me." His voice was steady, but behind it was something else. Pain, maybe, or tiredness, like carrying something heavy for too long. The story kept growing. Soon, national news picked it up. A talk show host brought it up during a segment. A senator mentioned it on social media. The hashtag "Darn let him wear it" started trending. People shared their own stories. Teachers who were told not to wear religious symbols. Nurses who were made to remove pins showing support for causes. Parents who felt disrespected in court for how they dressed or spoke. This one moment, this one medal opened a door to bigger questions. Was the court really fair for everyone? Did everyone get to bring their full self into that space? Or were some people always being asked to leave something behind? Back home, he watched all of this happen, like it was happening to someone else. He still got up early, still made coffee, still walked outside to check the mail. Life kept moving. But inside, something was changing. He began thinking more about what happened. Not just the order to remove the medal, but the way the room reacted, or didn't react. How the lawyers stayed quiet, how the judge didn't explain why. He remembered what it was like overseas, how orders were given, how you followed them without question. But now, he was home. And here, people could speak. So why didn't anyone say anything? He called his old John Yu, someone he served with, someone who knew what it meant to carry weight that wasn't just physical. "You ever feel like you're being treated differently?" he asked. There was a pause. "Every day," his friend said. "Sometimes you don't even notice it until it hits you in the face." He nodded, even though the other man couldn't see him. One night, a message came through from a woman named Lisa. She used to work with soldiers, helping them with legal issues after service. She said she wanted to meet, said she might be able to help. They met at a small cafe, away from cameras and crowds. She listened more than she talked. When she finally spoke, she said, "This isn't just about a medal." He looked at her. She continued, "It's about respect. About who gets to decide what's acceptable and what's not. And if we let this slide, it becomes normal." He didn't say much, just nodded again. She leaned forward. "If you're willing, I'd like to look into this deeper. See if this has happened before." He thought about it. Thought about the medal in his drawer. Thought about the looks people gave him. The silence in the courtroom. He said, "Okay." From that day on, things started to change. Lisa dug into past cases. She found similar moments, where people were told to dress differently, speak differently, act differently in court. Sometimes it was about clothing. Other times it was about how someone looked or where they came from. She started writing reports, sending emails, asking questions that most people never thought to ask. And as she did, more people started speaking up. A young woman shared how she was told to cover her hijab during a hearing. An older man talked about being asked to remove a cross because it might sway the jury. Another veteran recalled being told not to mention his service, like it somehow made his words less trustworthy. The pattern became clearer. Something was wrong. Not just with one judge, not just with one case, but with how people were treated, especially those who already felt like outsiders. And now he was part of that conversation, He didn't ask for it, didn't plan for it. But it was happening. And for the first time since returning home, he realized something. Maybe his fight wasn't over, maybe it had just changed shape. The days turned into weeks. The veteran began to notice how much attention his case was getting. Everywhere he went, people recognized him. Some smiled and nodded. Others stopped him to shake hands or thank him for speaking up. Strangers shared their own stories of feeling unseen or unheard in places they thought were fair. At first, it felt strange. He wasn't used to being noticed like this. Back when he wore the uniform, respect came naturally. It was part of the job. But now everything felt different. People weren't just thanking him for serving, they were thanking him for standing firm, for not backing down. Lisa, the lawyer helping him, kept digging deeper. She spent hours going through old court records, emails, and transcripts. Every day she found new pieces of the puzzle that made the picture clearer and darker. One evening she called him. "I think I've got something," she said. He sat down at the kitchen table, phone pressed tight against his ear. "What is it?" "There's a pattern," Lisa explained. "This isn't the first time Judge Hargrove has asked someone to change their appearance before testifying. There are other cases. People who were told to dress differently, take off religious symbols, even adjust how they spoke." Her voice grew quieter. "And there's more. Internal emails from the courthouse staff. They talk about certain witnesses being too emotional or distracting. Guess who fits that description most often?" He didn't need her to say it out loud. He already knew. Minorities, veterans, anyone who looked or sounded different. Lisa continued. In one email, the judge refers to medals as emotional props, like they're meant to sway the jury, instead of represent honor. The room felt smaller all of a sudden. He stared at the wall, trying to process what she'd said. Emotional props? That medal wasn't a prop. It wasn't meant to manipulate anyone. It was proof of sacrifice, proof of lives lost and battles fought. "Okay," he said finally. "What do we do next?" Lisa hesitated. "We expose it, all of it. But you need to be ready. Once this goes public, there's no turning back. You'll become the face of this fight." He thought about it, thought about the late nights lying awake, replaying the courtroom scene in his head, thought about the messages flooding his inbox, messages from veterans, teachers, parents, kids, all saying they saw themselves in his story. "I'm ready," he said. The next morning, Lisa filed a formal complaint with the Judicial Conduct Board. Attached were copies of the emails, past rulings, and witness statements. She also sent a detailed report to several news outlets, making sure the full story reached the public. Within hours, the story exploded again. Headlines everywhere read, "Judge accused of bias against minorities in courtroom, internal emails. Reveal shocking comments about witnesses. Veteran sparks movement for fair treatment in courts." People couldn't stop talking about it. Social media lit up once more. Comment sections filled with outrage, disbelief, and calls for accountability. Hashtags like "Fire, Respect Our Heroes" and "RAR, Justice for All" trended worldwide, but not everyone agreed. Some argued that judges had the right to set rules for decorum in court. Others claimed the focus on race and background was divisive. A few even accused the veteran of using his service as leverage for attention. Through it all, he stayed quiet. He let Lisa handle the interviews and press releases. He didn't want to argue or defend himself anymore. Instead, he focused on what mattered most: telling the truth. One afternoon, a documentary filmmaker reached out. She wanted to tell his whole story, from joining the military to coming home, from the courtroom incident to the growing movement. At first, he hesitated. Cameras made him uncomfortable. Lights, microphones, strangers asking personal questions, it wasn't his thing. But then he thought about why he agreed to speak out in the first place. To make people see, to make them understand. "If it helps," he told her, "then okay." As filming began, he started sharing things he hadn't talked about in years. How lonely it could get overseas. How hard it was to come back to a world that didn't always feel welcoming. How some days, The weight of everything seemed impossible to carry. The filmmaker listened closely. So did her team. They captured moments of raw honesty. Him sitting alone by the lake, staring at the horizon. Him holding the metal in his hand, tracing its edges with his thumb. Him talking to an old friend over coffee, laughing until tears came. It wasn't just about the courtroom anymore. It was about identity, belonging, resilience. Meanwhile, the Judicial Conduct Board launched an investigation. Judge Hargrove denied any wrongdoing, insisting his decisions were based solely on maintaining order in the courtroom. Supporters rallied behind him, praising his decades of service and dedication to justice. Critics, however, pointed to the mounting evidence. Emails, witness accounts, and patterns of behavior painted a troubling picture. Public opinion remained divided, but the pressure mounted. Every day brought new developments. News anchors debated the issue during primetime shows. Law professors weighed in on legal forums. Even comedians joked about it on late-night TV. Amidst the chaos, he tried to keep living his life. He woke up early, drank his coffee, walked the dog. But it was hard to ignore the storm swirling around him. Friends checked in regularly, offering support. Neighbors left notes on his door. "We're proud of you." "Stay strong." His wife worried constantly. She saw how tired he was, how heavy the situation weighed on him. One night she held his hand and said, "You don't have to do this alone, you know." He squeezed her hand back. "I'm not alone. Not anymore." As the weeks passed, the movement gained momentum. Organizations dedicated to civil rights, veterans affairs, and judicial reform joined forces. Petitions circulated online, demanding transparency and accountability in the courts. Schools invited him to speak about perseverance and courage. Through it all, he reminded himself why he started this journey. Not for fame or recognition, but because someone needed to stand up. Someone needed to say, "This isn't right." And so he kept standing, even when it hurt, even when it scared him, even when he wondered if it would ever truly matter, because deep down, he believed it did. The investigation dragged on longer than anyone expected. Days turned into weeks and the pressure kept building. For the veteran, life became a balancing act, between the private man who just wanted peace and the public figure thrust into the spotlight. Every knock at the door, every phone call, every message brought another reminder that his world had changed forever. The Judicial Conduct Board held closed-door meetings, reviewing evidence, questioning witnesses, and debating what to do next. Judge Hargrove remained silent in public but worked tirelessly behind the scenes, rallying supporters and defending his actions. His team argued that he was simply enforcing rules, nothing more. But the emails Lisa uncovered told a different story, one of bias and insensitivity. Meanwhile, the veteran found himself at the center of a growing divide. On one side were those who believed the judge's actions reflected deeper issues within the legal system. They saw this as an opportunity to demand change, not just for him, but for everyone who felt marginalized in courtrooms across the country. On the other side were people who thought the whole thing was blown out of proportion. "It's just a medal," they said. "Why are we making such a big deal out of this?" But it wasn't just a medal. That's what he kept trying to explain. It represented years of sacrifice, loss, and service. Asking him to remove it wasn't just about decorum. It was about erasing part of who he was. One evening, after another long day of interviews and meetings, he sat outside under the stars. The air was cool and the quiet gave him some relief from the noise. His wife joined him, sitting close enough that their shoulders touched. "You doing okay?" she asked softly. He shrugged. "I don't know. Sometimes I feel like I'm fighting, all over again, like I'm back there." She nodded, understanding without needing details. She'd seen how the war still lingered in him. The sleepless nights, the sudden silences, the way certain sounds made him flinch. And now, this fight was stirring up old wounds. "You're stronger than you think," she said. "You've always been." He smiled faintly. "I hope so." As the weeks went by, the debate spread beyond the courtroom and into everyday conversations. Lawyers debated it at conferences. Teachers discussed it in classrooms. Families argued about it over dinner tables. Everyone seemed to have an opinion. Some judges publicly supported Judge Hargrove, saying courts needed strict rules to remain impartial. Others spoke out against him, calling for reforms to ensure fairness for all witnesses. Legal experts wrote articles dissecting the case, pointing out inconsistencies in how similar situations had been handled in the past. For the veteran, hearing these discussions was both encouraging and exhausting. Encouraging because it meant people cared. Exhausting because it felt like no matter what happened, someone would still be unhappy. One day he received an invitation to speak at a national veterans convention. At first he hesitated. Public speaking wasn't his strength, and he worried about saying the wrong thing, but Lisa encouraged him. "This is your chance to tell your story," she said. "Not just yours, but everyone's whose voice hasn't been heard." So he agreed. When the day came, he stood backstage, gripping the edges of the podium. The room buzzed with energy. Hundreds of veterans, families, and supporters gathered together. He took a deep breath and stepped forward. "Thank you for having me," he began, his voice steady but soft. "I didn't plan to be here today. I didn't plan to be part of this conversation. All I did was walk into a courtroom wearing something that meant a lot to me." He paused, looking out at the crowd. Faces stared back, some familiar, others not, but all listening intently. "And when I was told to take it off," he continued, "it hurt. Not because of the medal itself, but because it felt like I was being asked to leave a piece of myself behind, to hide who I am." The room grew quieter. "I fought for freedom overseas," he said. "But coming home, I realized freedom isn't just about laws or borders. It's about dignity, about being treated equally no matter where you come from or what you've done." Applause erupted before he finished, but he raised a hand to quiet them. "We deserve better," he said firmly. "All of us. Whether we wear uniforms or not, whether we stand in courtrooms or classrooms, we deserve to be respected for who we are." When he stepped away from the podium, the crowd rose to their feet, cheering. Strangers hugged him, thanked him, told him they were proud of him. For the first time in months, he felt a flicker of hope. Despite the support, challenges kept coming. The Department of Veterans Affairs reached out, offering him a symbolic commendation and a position in public affairs. It sounded promising, a chance to make real change from within the system. But almost immediately, political backlash forced them to pull the offer. Critics accused him of using his story for personal gain. Supporters fired back, calling the accusations baseless and unfair. The documentary filmmaker decided to postpone releasing her project, fearing it might inflame tensions further. Through it all, he stayed grounded. He reminded himself why he started this journey, not for recognition, but for justice. Still, the constant scrutiny wore him down. Sleep became harder to find. Conversations felt heavier. Even simple tasks like grocery shopping or walking the dog felt overwhelming, his wife noticed. One night she sat him down and said, "You can't carry this alone anymore. Let me help." He nodded, grateful for her strength. Together they leaned on friends, family, and counselors to navigate the storm. By the time the Judicial Conduct Board announced its decision, the country was holding its breath. Would they side with the judge, or would they acknowledge the harm caused? In the IE, and the board found Judge Hargrove guilty of misconduct. They cited racial insensitivity and abuse of authority, ordering him to undergo training and stripping him of senior status. It wasn't the full dismissal many had hoped for, but it was something. For the veteran, the verdict brought mixed emotions. Relief, yes, but also frustration. Justice felt incomplete, like a puzzle missing pieces. He knew this wasn't just about one judge. It was about a system that needed fixing. And so, he kept going. He kept speaking out. He kept sharing his story, hoping it would spark bigger changes. Because even though the battle was far from over, he believed it was worth fighting. When the Judicial Conduct Board announced its decision, it felt like the world held its breath for a moment. People waited to hear what would happen next. Would there be real accountability, or would the system protect itself as usual? The verdict came down. Judge Hargrove was found guilty of misconduct. The board cited racial insensitivity and abuse of authority, ordering him to undergo training on diversity and impartiality. They also stripped him of his senior status, meaning he'd no longer preside over high-profile cases. But they stopped, short of removing him from the bench entirely. For many, the ruling was bittersweet. Some celebrated it as a victory, a step toward fairness and respect in the legal system. Others saw it as too lenient, arguing that someone who showed such bias shouldn't still hold a position of power. Either way, the decision sparked intense debate across the country. The veteran watched the news coverage quietly, sitting alone, in his living room. He didn't cheer or shout when the verdict was read. Instead, he sat there staring at the screen, letting the weight of everything sink in. Part of him felt relief. Finally, someone acknowledged that what happened wasn't right. But another part of him couldn't shake the feeling that justice was incomplete. His wife walked in and sat beside him. "How are you holding up?" she asked. He sighed, running a hand over his face. "I don't know, it feels unfinished." She nodded slowly. "It's not perfect, but it's a start." "A start," he repeated almost to himself. "Yeah, I guess so." In the days that followed, the spotlight began to fade. Reporters moved on to other stories. Social media shifted its focus. Life started returning to normal, or at least as close to normal as it could get after everything that had happened. But for him, things weren't the same. The stress of the past months lingered. He noticed it in small ways. How he jumped at loud noises. How crowded places made him uneasy. How some nights he woke up drenched in sweat, heart racing. These were symptoms he thought he'd left behind after the war, but now they were back, stronger than ever. One morning he went to see a counselor. He'd resisted the idea at first, thinking he could handle it on his own. But his wife convinced him, reminding him that asking for help wasn't weakness, it was strength. The counselor listened patiently as he talked about the courtroom, the medal, the emails, the public attention, about how proud he once felt wearing the uniform, and how betrayed he felt now, about how hard it was to fight battles on two fronts, one overseas and one at home. "You've carried a lot," the counselor said gently. "More than most people realize." He nodded, blinking back tears. "Sometimes it feels like I'm carrying everyone else's expectations too." The counselor smiled softly. "You're allowed to put some of that down. You don't have to carry it all forever." Those words stuck with him. For the first time in months, he let himself imagine putting down the burden, even if just for a little while. As the weeks passed, the movement inspired by his story continued to grow. Organizations dedicated to veterans' rights, civil rights, and judicial reform joined forces, pushing for changes in how courts treated witnesses. Petitions circulated online, demanding stricter guidelines to prevent bias. Law schools added case studies about the incident to their curriculums, sparking discussions about fairness and equality in the legal system. The veteran stayed involved, though he stepped back from the spotlight. He attended meetings, shared insights, and offered advice when asked. But he also set boundaries, knowing he needed time to heal. He turned down interviews and declined invitations to events that felt more about spectacle than substance. Instead, he focused on smaller, quieter ways to make a difference. He visited schools to talk to students about resilience and courage. He mentored young veterans struggling to adjust to civilian life. He volunteered at community centers, helping kids who reminded him of himself at that age, full of dreams, but unsure of where to start. One day, while working with a group of teenagers, one of them asked, "Why do you keep doing this? Don't you get tired?" He smiled, leaning back in his chair. "Yeah, I do get tired. But I keep going because it matters. Because if I stop, who will?" The teen nodded thoughtfully. "That's cool." "Not really," he replied with a chuckle. "Just necessary." Despite the progress, challenges remained. The Department of Veterans Affairs retracted its earlier offer of a public affairs role, citing political pressure. Sponsors pulled out of the documentary project, worried about backlash. Opportunities dried up, leaving him feeling sidelined professionally. It stung, but he refused to let bitterness take root. Instead, he poured his energy into building something new. With Lisa's help, he started a nonprofit aimed at supporting veterans navigating the legal system. They called it Voices of Honor, focusing on education, advocacy, and mental health resources. At first, it was just an idea, a spark of hope in a dark time. But as word spread, donations rolled in, volunteers signed up, and partnerships formed. Veterans reached out, sharing their own struggles and triumphs. Families thanked him for creating a space where they felt seen and heard. Through it all, he reminded himself why he started this journey. Not for recognition, but for justice. Not for revenge, but for change. Even so, the toll was undeniable. His marriage strained under the weight of constant stress. Arguments became more frequent, misunderstandings harder to resolve. One night, after yet another disagreement, his wife looked at him and said, "We can't keep doing this. Either we figure it out together, or we lose each other." Her words hit him like a punch to the chest. For all his efforts to fix the world, he realized he'd neglected the people closest to him. That night, they talked, really talked, for hours, about fears, frustrations, hopes, about how much they still loved each other, even when things got tough. From then on, they worked harder to support each other. She joined him at nonprofit events, offering her perspective and encouragement. He made time for date nights and family, dinners prioritizing their relationship. Slowly, the cracks began to mend. By the end of the year, the veteran found himself reflecting on everything that had happened. He thought about the courtroom, the medal, the emails, the protests, about the highs and lows, the victories and defeats, about how far he'd come and how far there still was to go. He realized something important. The fight wasn't just about him anymore. It never had been. It was about everyone who felt unseen, unheard, undervalued. And as long as those voices existed, the work wasn't done. So he kept going, one step at a time, one voice at a time. Because even though the road was long, he believed it led somewhere worth reaching. A year had passed since that day in the courtroom. The veteran stood alone at a quiet memorial park on a crisp autumn morning. The air smelled of fallen leaves and damp earth. Around him were rows of stones engraved with names of people who didn't make it home, names of those who gave everything so others could live. He carried something small in his hand, the medal he'd been asked to remove. He hadn't worn it since that day, but today felt different. Today wasn't about defiance or pride. It was about closure. He walked slowly, placing the medal gently beside one of the stones. It wasn't his name carved there. It belonged to someone else, but it didn't matter. Every stone represented sacrifice. Every stone told a story. As he stepped back, he thought about all the things that had happened since then. The protests, the debates, the victories, the losses. He thought about the emails, the interviews, the late-night conversations, about how far he'd come and how much farther he still had to go. For a long time, he just stood there, letting the silence wrap around him. No cameras, no reporters, no crowds. Just him and the memories of those who couldn't speak for themselves anymore. When he got home, the house was empty. His wife had taken the kids to visit her parents for the weekend. He poured himself a cup of coffee and sat by the window, watching the sunlight filter through the trees. Life had changed so much in the past year. Some changes were good, stronger relationships, meaningful work, a sense of purpose. Others weren't, lost opportunities, strained friendships, lingering scars. He pulled out an old notebook and flipped through its pages. Notes from meetings, ideas for speeches, reminders of things he wanted to say but never did. On one page, he found a quote someone had shared with him during the height of the controversy. "Courage isn't having no fear. Courage is doing what you believe is right even when you're afraid." He smiled faintly, tracing the words with his finger. That was true, wasn't it? Courage wasn't about being fearless. It was about moving forward despite the fear. Later, that week, he decided to leave the public eye entirely. The nonprofit he started, Voices of Honor, was thriving under new leadership. Lisa stayed involved, ensuring the mission continued. But for him, it was time to step away. Not because he didn't care, but because he needed to find peace again. He packed up his belongings and moved to a small town in Georgia, far from the noise and chaos of the city. There, he rented a modest house surrounded by woods and fields. Neighbors waved hello, but respected his privacy. For the first time in years, he felt like he could breathe. In this new place, he began volunteering at a local youth center. Many of the kids came from tough backgrounds, broken homes, absent parents, struggles with school. They reminded him of himself at that age, searching for direction, hungry for connection. One afternoon, he sat with a group of teenagers, listening as they talked about their dreams and fears. One boy, barely 15, spoke quietly about wanting to join the military someday. "I want to do something important," the boy said, "but I'm scared." The veteran nodded, understanding completely. "Being scared doesn't mean you're weak," he replied. "It means you're human, and sometimes the bravest thing you can do is take the first step, even if you don't know where it'll lead." The boy looked at him, wide-eyed. "Did you ever feel like that?" "All the time," he admitted with a smile. "Still do." Over time, he built a routine in the small town. Mornings were for walking the dog along wooded trails. Afternoons were spent mentoring kids or working on community projects. Evenings were quiet, filled with books, music, and reflection. He kept in touch with Lisa and a few close friends, checking in occasionally to see how Voices of Honor was doing. The organization continued to grow, helping veterans navigate legal challenges and providing resources for mental health support. Knowing he'd played a part in creating something meaningful brought him comfort. But mostly, he focused on healing. He attended counseling regularly, learning healthier ways to cope with stress and trauma. He reconnected with nature, finding solace in the simplicity of trees, rivers, and open skies. And he worked on forgiving, not just others, but himself. Forgiveness wasn't easy. There were days when guilt crept in, whispering that he should have done more, fought harder, pushed further. But he reminded himself that he'd done what he could with the strength he had. That was enough. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, he sat on the porch with a cup of tea. A soft breeze rustled the leaves, and somewhere in the distance, a bird sang its evening song. He thought about the medal he'd left at the memorial park, about the courtroom, the judge, the emails, the protests, about the countless people who reached out to thank him, criticize him, challenge him, support him, and he realized something important. The fight wasn't over. Not really. Justice wasn't something you achieved once and then forgot about. It was ongoing. A journey, not a destination. But now he understood his role differently. He wasn't the face of the movement anymore. He wasn't the one shouting loudest or standing tallest. Instead, he was a quiet voice, a steady presence, a reminder that change starts small and grows over time. He sipped his tea, feeling a rare sense of calm. The scars were still there, the sleepless nights, the moments of doubt, the weight of everything he'd carried. But they didn't define him. Not anymore. What defined him was resilience, compassion, hope, and somewhere deep inside, he believed, in justice, even if it never fully believed in him. That night, as he lay in bed staring at the ceiling, he made a promise to himself. He wouldn't stop fighting, not for fairness, not for dignity, not for the voices that still needed to be heard. But he'd fight differently now, with patience, with kindness, with grace. Because the hardest battles weren't always the ones fought on distant shores or in crowded courtrooms. Sometimes the toughest fights were the ones waged within yourself. And he truly knew, that he was ready.